Good afternoon and a warm welcome to this session. Today's theme at COP is transportation. So we're very happy to welcome you to a session about financing the transformation of the road freight and with Barclays and Einride. And we're very happy to kick it off shortly. My name is Maha Bouzaid. I'm Vice President and Head of Region Middle East and Africa and Sweden for Business Sweden, hosting this pavilion for Sweden and this event. And we're very excited to talk about how we can accelerate this shift together. And of course, financing has a huge role to play to be an enabler in that. But before we get started with the panel, I would like to warmly welcome Mr. Pierpaolo Settembri, beautiful Italian name, just tried to pronounce it correctly, who is here from the European Commission and the Directorate of General Mobility and Transport. It's going to open up with a keynote. Warm welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. And hi also to our friends that are following online. I would like to thank you for allowing me to address this qualified audience ahead of this prestigious panel. The title of this session, which is Financing the Transformation of the Road Freight Sector, tells us a few things about the fight against climate change and transport. For one, today we celebrate the first EU Transport Day at a COP. We as DG Move in the European Commission, we have been to COPs before, but this is the first time that we as European Union, we organize a Transport Day to give it the visibility it deserves. Second, the transport sector is today the first sector in terms of CO2 emissions, as you know, and is the only sector whose emissions are still growing in absolute terms. This is not something that makes us happy or proud, but it does strengthen our resolve to take action. The third and final point, this session reflects the specific challenge of the road transport sector. Globally, road transport accounts for 69% of CO2 emissions. In the EU, this share goes up to 76% in transport emissions. Heavy-duty vehicles, although accounting for less than 2% of the vehicles on the road in the EU, they are responsible for almost 1/4 of the CO2 emissions from road transport. In one sentence, the progressive decarbonization of the EU truck fleet is crucial to reach climate neutrality by 2050. In light of the above, it's not a surprise that a large part of the EU regulatory effort focused on road transport, including freight transport. This was done, of course, as part of the first high-level strategy to put on the table by this Commission, which is the European Green Deal, which today is also legally binding through the European climate law. The EU has also agreed an interim milestone to cut CO2 emissions by 55% by 2030, and now work is ongoing to look at the 2040 trajectory. Transport is undergoing a fundamental shift to a new power base. That's why we are here today, built on zero-emission powertrains and renewable and low-carbon fuels. In the EU, this is now enshrined in law, for example, through the revised CO2 standards for vehicles, through the revised energy directive, and through the regulation on refuel EU aviation and fuel EU maritime. Regulation at EU level is set to transform the transport sector, and the heavy-duty vehicles in particular are impacted by the following measures. And I will mention three in particular. The first is very timely because it's the revision of the CO2 standard performance for heavy-duty vehicles. The proposal increases the current ambition and sets targets of 45% emission reduction for trucks and coaches by 2030, 65% by 2035, and 90% by 2040, and at the same time mandates 100% zero-emission buses by 2030. The institutional negotiations are ongoing on this file. The Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation came into force 2 months ago, but its provisions will become applicable in 4 months. The main elements are the mandatory fleet-based targets ensuring that the electric recharging infrastructure grows at the same pace as the electric vehicle fleet, mandatory targets for sufficient fast charging infrastructure for cars, and a separate electric charging infrastructure for trucks will be deployed along the full TEN-T network. And then a minimum infrastructure for hydrogen trucks was mandated in urban nodes and along the TEN-T core network. Last but not least, in 2023, a new separate emission trading system was created, ETS2, covering primarily fuel combustion in buildings and in road transport, and the system will apply to road transport fuel suppliers starting in 2027. Overall, market developments are encouraging. The past years have seen quick acceleration in the deployment of zero-emission vehicles in road transport. Last year, almost every 10th passenger car sold in the EU was at zero emission. The number of electric buses on our street has seen a 7-fold increase in the last 5 years. And in the first month of 2023, around 30% of the new registrations were battery electric, more than the number of new diesel buses. A growing number of light and heavy-duty zero-emission commercial vehicles are being registered every year for the last mile and urban logistics segment, but increasingly also for the long-haul segment. This stable decarbonization pathway for the transport sector in the EU is inducing a major innovation push in the energy and fuel sector. We need to modernize and extend electricity grids and quickly ramp up production of renewable and low-carbon fuels to meet demand from transport sectors. Take the electrification of heavy-duty road transport as an example. Vehicles are coming into the market. We know what we have to do for recharging infrastructure. Problem of access to the electricity grid cannot become the bottleneck. All of this, of course, will require massive financial investment. That's the core of our discussion today, from the public sector, certainly, but particularly from the private sector. Finance is not the only enabling factor. For key strategic technologies, we need to have the right planning and permitting conditions in place too. In the EU, we are addressing this through instruments such as the Net Zero Industry Act. The Commission has also recently proposed a package specifically aimed at greening freight transport. This includes, for road transport, a revision of the directive on weights and dimensions to provide the right incentive for zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles and to promote intermodal transport. Moreover, 1 month ago, the Commission has also presented a proposal for a revised directive on combined transport to promote an increased uptake of intermodal transport. Last but not least, let me also mention the new Count Emissions EU initiative, a new harmonized framework which will allow to calculate and compare door-to-door CO2 emissions of transport services. We need to empower consumers to make responsible choices, and in order to do so, we have to share with them the information they need to make such choices. I'm pleased that on Monday this week, the Council of the EU adopted a general approach and is ready to enter into negotiations with the European Parliament. Such ambitious plan requires an equally ambitious approach to financing and support to make this transition happen. We need both regulatory and incentive measures, and we need to gauge private investment for sustainable transport. We all know that public funding alone will not be sufficient. Nonetheless, the EU has put in place a comprehensive set of funding and financing programs for investments in carbon-neutral mobility. Taken together, we allocated nearly 100 billion euros for the period 21-27 to contribute to the development of a greener, smarter, and more resilient transport system. This includes research and innovation support through Horizon Europe program, support for the infrastructure projects on the TEN-T network under the Connecting Europe facility, and provision of risk-bearing capacity through the InvestEU guarantee program. In addition to this, following COVID, the Recovery and Resilience Facility is also there to support sustainable mobility systems. Member States have allocated about 93 billion euros, more than 16.5% of their overall national plans, to transport-related investments. This brings the total to almost 200 billion for the overall financial period. As you know, freight transport by road has also been included in the EU taxonomy. This provides transparency to investors into what companies are doing environmentally sustainable economic activities, and thereby directs capital into sustainable sectors that can support the green transition. Before concluding, let me mention briefly 3 other related areas. The first is digital. The Commission has focused very much on the digital agenda. In the transport sector, we all know that digitalization and automation can help increase safety, security, reliability, and comfort, but also complements and reinforces sustainability measures. It has been often said decarbonization and digitalization go hand in hand. Road transport is leading the other modes in the digital revolution, but to go further, we need to open up access to data and to get all relevant actors cooperating and sharing their data. For example, we have recently revised the Intelligent Transport Services Directive, which provides for the mandatory collection of crucial data. This represents an important precondition for automated vehicles and other innovative services that will support drivers on a daily basis. The second area is urban mobility. As we know, cities only take up 4% of EU land area, while they provide home to as much as 75% of our EU citizens, which is a figure that is growing. So urban mobility and logistics truly need to function smoothly and also develop to take on board new trends and technologies. This is, of course, an area where national and local levels have the greatest influence, but where we at the EU level can provide guidance and frameworks that can help, including to share good practices. The final area is resilience. We have learned the hard way during this mandate what resilience means. We learned during COVID, when the national borders within the EU re-emerged, and when Russia's aggression against Ukraine meant, among many other dramatic things, the blockade of the Black Sea route to export grain. In both these occasions, road transport literally saved Europe. And in the latter case, it saved also Ukraine and possibly global food security. I therefore want to conclude my short speech with a word of gratitude towards this incredible sector that discreetly but effectively keeps Europe together and economically thriving. Thank you very much, and I wish you a productive panel.
Very much, Mr. Settembri. It's really hopeful to see the fantastic ambition that the European Commission comes with. We're truly transitioning from climate threat to climate hope. It's obvious. Thank you very much for that. And with that, we'd like to welcome up the panelists today. So we have Mr. Robert Falck with us from the CEO and President of Einride. We have Daniel Hanna from Barclays. And also TJ Conway from RMI. Welcome up on stage. Vi kan använda den här istället. Vad sa du? Nej, jag har ingen kabel. Ska jag ta den här då? I'll use this one. It seems to work fine. Great. So before we get started with the questions, could you please introduce yourself? I mean, maybe I should just take a word. I was yesterday in the green zone and looking at the Einride's Gen 2 Bruce vehicle. I could really recommend you to go and have a look at it. It's really cool. But would you like to start, Robert?
Yeah, thank you for that. And my name is Robert Falck. I'm the CEO and founder of Einride. We started a company with ambition to be the facilitator of the transition in heavy-duty freight transport. It's great to be here.
Mm-hmm. Great.
It's great to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. Daniel Hanna, I'm the Global Head of Sustainable Finance at Barclays Bank.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I am TJ Conway. I am the principal and co-lead of the Oil and Gas Solutions team at RMI. My colleague, my Stockholm-based colleague, Thomas Koch was unable to attend due to scheduling conflict, and he looked at the roster and said, Thomas Joseph Conway looks pretty close to my name, so let's get him. No, but seriously, my team focuses on seeking to accelerate the energy transition, diversifying away from oil and gas, while also driving sectoral decarbonization. So we do a lot of work with Thomas and his team.
Thank you very much, AJ. So we're going to start with you, Daniel. So can you tell us a little bit why Barclays actually choose to support companies rolling out solutions to decarbonize road freight? What do you see in it, and why are you focusing your investment in this sector? Because it means you're not investing elsewhere.
Well, I think maybe let me pick up where Pierpaolo actually dropped off, which was, I thought he made a fantastic important point around just how critical this infrastructure is for the resilience of our economies. And as one of the first banks to commit to becoming net zero and setting an ambition of mobilizing $1 trillion for sustainable and transition finance, you know, we're really quite thoughtful about, as you say, where to focus our attention. So I think sort of very big picture, you know, we're very focused around enabling a tripling of renewables, looking to really tackle the hard to abate sectors, and then thinking about innovative solutions for resiliency and adaptation. And I think road transport sort of fits very neatly into the second and third bucket there. As we heard from Pierpaolo, it is a important enabler for the economy, but is also a large source of emissions. And actually, if you take the sort of road trucking space, although they're at less than, I think, 8% of all vehicles globally, it accounts for more than 35% of the emissions from road transport, and sort of equates into roughly, I think, about 9% of global emissions. And so on the one hand, if you look at, I think, one of the tremendous successes over the last 5 years of the fact that we now, 1 in 5 probably new cars this year will be EVs. 5 years ago, that was 1 in 70. We haven't seen that same acceleration and deployment in the trucking and road transport area. And I think that's something that we're really focused on trying to solve, which is one of the reasons why we were really pleased to be able to partner with a really important and I think innovative party like Einride. So I guess that's why we're focused on it.
Well, thank you very much. And I think, exactly as you said, being one of the largest emitters, that's also kind of a low-hanging fruit. We really see the transportation industry at the forefront of driving the climate change, which is fantastic. It's really gaining momentum. So if we proceed then to TJ then, do you see any uncertainties in this market today? And if so, is there a way to de-risk the investment in these solutions?
Yeah, great question. So when we're thinking about uncertainty, it's not a question of if the energy transition is going to happen in this sector, it's a question of when. And so there are some important factors at play. First are the economics, right? We look at the economics, we see that they are compelling. There's, if you're just thinking about just the pace of the transition, that's where some of the critical issues are coming into play. And in that sense, policy can have an important accelerating role to play. And this does matter also from the investor perspective as well, right? Where your internal rates of return are dependent on timing. So policy is quite important, even sort of in this sort of market context overall. I think when we get into some of the details around investment and capital deployment, maybe I can just stop there and we can get into more details on that.
Yeah, sure. No, great. And so what you're saying is that de-risking is mainly done by bringing forward the return on investment and making sure that the policy is up to speed to support that acceleration. Fantastic. So Robert, being an expert in the field of decarbonized road freight systems, then what is it? Can you tell us a little bit about this ecosystem and what does it consist of and what is the impact it has and how can it be financed then, based from your experience?
I think that's the first time I've actually been called an expert, so thank you for that. But we started the whole journey with the company to learn these experience and actually solve a lot of these challenges. One of the things that I thought stood out was that if you're going to go electric, you need to think about it differently. You have to operate in a different way. You have to have infrastructure charging. You have to have customers willing to change how they work. You have to have people and drivers that the dedicated wanted to go drive electric vehicles. And all this change needed someone to step up and said, we're going to learn how to get this done. And there's been a long journey since we started in 2016 with the company to convince people that the future can be actually addressed with digital, electric, and autonomous solutions. And what we learned over the time that maybe the biggest challenge is actually the financing of the whole equation. We have a kind of a lean and mean setup today when it comes to transport perspective. We have a lot of great truck manufacturers that make a lot of money manufacturing trucks, then financing those trucks for owner-operators. Those owner-operators run their own small transport companies, and then they sell their service to big consolidating companies, and those companies in turn sell directly to the ones who actually need transport shipped. That very complex ecosystem creates a sort of say lock-in an existing solution, and if you want to solve that, you need to have a new type of player that address so to say, both the technology challenge, but maybe also to create a new financial system. And that's what we wanted to create with Einride. So I always said that we're 40% technology, but 60% business model and financing.
Right.
So that's why the partnerships and the people that are on the, so to say, financing side are willing to take risk and they are willing to not necessarily take risk, just to challenge how structure looks like today and finding a new way of solving it. That's the most important part.
Because maybe you can just mention for those who doesn't know much about Einride, what is it that you actually provide? It's a turnkey solution. You operate the vehicles as well for.
I think we have the best ever business model.
Of course.
because at the core of what we're solving is headache of a lot of boards out there. Because I think that on an ownership level, most people has now the incentives and the board sitting here. Most of the board members are here and stating that we're going to be CO2 neutral until 2035. We're going to reduce our CO2 emissions. Then they go back to a CEO, and the CEO said, "Shit, I need to do something now." And the CEO looks, from our perspective, to the transport logistic guy. And that person says, "Well, we are doing only diesel now, and all our transporters are based on diesel. I don't know how to address this." And the people that he works with right now, you're kind of taking a very concrete example, is our big Fortune 500 company. They spend roughly 300 million euros on transport in Europe. And they utilize more than 800 different small carriers, all diesel-based. And that means that if they want to go electric, as the board has decided, they need to have a partner in making the whole transition happen based on their needs. And that's where we come in. So our core business model is to help big companies to reach their ESG targets and CO2 neutral reduction plans. And we utilize digital, electric, autonomous technology to make that happen.
Great. So look no further. We have you here. Perfect. So going back to TJ, talking about the ecosystem that Robert is mentioning here, charging infrastructure is one of the main enablers as well, right, of the scaling of this. And what is that you have on this topic specifically, and how can we ensure that investment also go where they need to go?
Yeah, for sure. So, we need to do grid and charger planning in tandem with vehicle adoption. And the problem with charging isn't the chargers, it's really the grid. And, we need to get power to where it will be valuable to the vehicles. And we already have a pretty good idea of where that will be, because it is in many instances where internal combustion engine trucks are already stopping and filling up. So we have a good idea of how many chargers are needed and what types of power they will require. But the priority really has to be on delivering to where it needs to be while keeping electricity costs at levels that preserve the total cost of ownership, right? So that is really important point. Many people see cost risk in stranded assets from overinvestment, right? This risk that if we invest too heavily now, there might be stranded asset risks. That RMI does not see that as being a real risk. When we're thinking about an analogy that we use, it's, let's say that you're a 17-year-old and you're working in a fast food chain, right? You do want that 17-year-old to be investing in their pension fund or, for retirement today too, right? We need to be putting in the investments today so that we can have the scalable solutions in the future. So that's how it ties into investment. I think just final point, we can have a pretty good idea of what needs to happen, but making it a reality can be difficult, and it requires an alignment between grid planning and transport planning, right? Two sectors that in the past have been moving sort of in parallel, but not necessarily communicating with one another, and that's sort of the critical issue here at a fundamental level.
Thank you. And we just had, before the panel, we had a small chat, and I appreciated that, because you were explaining to me, how important it is, as you said, that we plan the grid capacity at the same time as we plan the charging infrastructure, because obviously they're going to consume a lot of capacity. And I asked you, do you think we can use the existing points where we already charge? And you said that probably for point-to-point and road. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think, and this also ties into sort of the importance of electrification, right? That we do have a lot of opportunities in the near term to scale, renewable electric solutions. That's what we should be leaning into, and that ties in with, charging points that are, in point-to-point type models that are already there. So there is sort of an opportunity for continuing to
We don't have
and charge in the same location.
Start from scratch. But Robert, I think you wanted to say something there.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting topic because, and this is also one of the risks where you say the over sort of investment. And this is, I'm a big firm believer that should be a market-driven transition rather than a governmental-driven transition. And I think you're going to make a very excellent point here when it comes to the grid. If the government is going to put up the charging stations, they're not going to be in the right place. They're going to be where it's convenient. And from a business position, if you want to make it a sustainable business case for electrification for transport, you need to have the charging in the right positions when you optimize the operational uptime for the setups to serve the customers. If that is off for where the operational setups actually are, they're not going to be utilized. That means that we're going to build out charging infrastructure that's not going to be used because it's not going to be a business case to actually use them. And that's a great example where it needs to be a market demand-driven transition. Then, of course, I think government has a big important part to play when it comes to facilitating and enabling. But I think that the market needs, from a business case perspective, to drive this transition.
Good point. I think you agree, right? No more point there. Thank you. Good point. Talking then back to staying on the infrastructure for a bit for Daniel then. So we are at the point, obviously, where this needs to be deployed fast as well. All the infrastructure needed to enable this. Do you see any opportunity for those who take the lead, the first mover advantage, any of that? And how to make sure that we also use the momentum and gain and accelerate it further. But is there any specific point in actually being the first?
I mean, look at Barclays. We see this as not just this topic, but I think more broadly, the whole energy transition, the move to a low carbon economy. I mean, we're seeing the rewiring of the global economy, and I think that's going to throw up huge opportunities for investors, banks, to really reap a return. And I think for us, there's very much about a business opportunity where we can actually drive returns for our shareholders. But just saying those words doesn't mean it's going to happen. And I think I want to echo something that both TJ and Robert said, which is I think one of the big challenges that we're now going into is we need an ecosystem approach to many of these things. I think I really echo something that Robert said. We put out a piece of research a couple of months ago looking at what a fully EV economy looks like. And we used California because probably one of the most likely of where it will really get to that full tipping point. And at that stage, basically for the grid, it is a challenge to be affordable, reliable, and sustainable at the same time, unless we start seeing some really significant changes. And one of the things I'd really echo is the use of technology and AI to start optimizing how we are going to use it. We're going to have to get used to a much more disaggregated grid and a much more optimized grid that is changing almost second by second, nanosecond by nanosecond. So that's I think we do need that kind of ecosystem view. And I think that's also particularly important in trucking because certain parts of the trucking industry are very low margin. And so how you can invest to transition across low-margin businesses is really difficult. And so, again, you kind of need to look across the value chain and understand who has the capability to then invest to decarbonize. And I think, again, Einride is playing a really key role here because working with the ultimate user effectively and seeing how that then gets optimized through the whole system is a really key part of that. From the banking side of things, I mean, I think the way that we're also thinking about it, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, is then how do we deploy capital into those different situations where there's some earlier risk, where there's some more sort of infrastructure type risk, and then where can we find innovative solutions that can really unlock new capital?
Thank you very much. That was interesting. So, and obviously you partnered up with Einride because you see a huge potential there. So, would like to get your view on that, Robert. How have partnerships like the one you have here with Barclays helped facilitate your work?
I think what really stands out in the partnership we have with Barclays, it's how insightful the bank has been with, I wouldn't say flexibility, but to understanding that they need to challenge their own narrative of things. I mean, one of the main holdbacks for the whole financing of, for instance, EVs, especially in the heavy-duty freight industry, is that we don't have a data for it. That means that someone that lend out capital doesn't have residual value. What's the second lifetime? How does this play out over time? And from a bank perspective, or for anyone in the industry, to not be able to do an Excel based on known data, that's uncomfortable. It's beyond risk. It's just incomprehensible. And that means that you have to go outside your comfort zone and to find new solutions for how it can make it done. If you look at, for instance, diesel trucks, you can probably finance them to at least 110, 120% of the value if it's in a customer contract. And that kind of maturity we have on the diesel side. But when it goes to electric vehicles, we don't have that 10 years of data. That means that we can finance them to 60, 70%. And before Barclays, we couldn't even finance them. Because we had to take all the credit ourselves in equity and in risk and to actually deploy them. So that was the biggest challenge when we have been scaling. You have vehicles, you have the technology, you have customers that want to deploy them, you even have the business case. But unless someone is willing to take on the debt side, you can't make it happen. And therefore, the partnership with Barclays has been so instrumental, because here you have a big global player with the credibility that goes with, to say, hey, we're going to solve this. And being confident enough as a company to say, okay, we looked at it, we understand the dynamics, we understand the complete picture, but we're willing to see what's not already there. And I think that's one of the key enablers for making this transition happen, to be visionary, but at the same time practical. And that's how we make the future happen.
That's very nice, and that's also what partnership is about, right? You find each other, you're willing to take risks together. I think that's very nice. And also, I mean, Daniel, then, from your point of view, apart from, you mentioned before, this is not only being, of course, a good global player, right? A good citizen and you know, in this field to drive a climate transition, it's also a business opportunity for you to actually invest in this field. But apart from that, do you see other gains from investing here? Is it the knowledge? Is it the, you know, being the first mover? Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, I think as Robert and TJ, I think we're all spoken about the importance of data and understanding. And I think the more that you understand a situation, the more opportunity then there is to create value from it. And I think, and I sort of go back to that point around ecosystem. So if you think about the other things that we're doing in this space, apart from working with Einride, I mean, we have £500 million that we're investing in early stage climate technologies. And one of the companies that we've backed is called SunSwap. And effectively, we talked about the emissions that are coming from trucking. What we haven't talked about is the emissions that come from cold chains that are on those trucks, for example, which, you know, I think are currently not subject to the same policies. But SunSwap have got a really innovative structure using solar panels and battery storages that completely decarbonizes that and effectively electrifies it. They've got more than 2 orders worth. They've already sold out in terms of next year's orders, and so we've put an equity investment into that, and we see some potential upside there. And then in terms of sort of on the other side, right, you know, you've got the innovative solutions that we're working with Einride, but then also on the infrastructure side, we're looking at EV charging networks and saying, okay, well, can you apply some of the learnings that we've had from other infrastructure financings, and particularly where you have data, I think as Robert was saying, is really key, and then put effectively kind of infrastructure financing against those networks as well. So I think once you've understood the ecosystem to a certain level and have, you know, you want to kind of lean into this topic, then you can try and find opportunities in which, you know, that you can make them hopefully bankable, and then that creates value both for the customer, the person that's borrowing, and ultimately the bank as well.
That's great. That's a good way to wrap it up also, looking at the ecosystem back. And for you, Robert, I mean, on the topic of opportunities, beyond what's in it for the companies, for your customers, for the financial institutions, and are there other opportunities as well for the public sector, other you can mention?
I mean, as conclude, I think the future is quite cool as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks kind, I mean, like we have an opportunity to shape something that our grandchildren is going to be proud of. It's like we are in a transition, and I think there's something with the debate of the whole climate change. I think it's just in a way very not discussed enough is also that we are an inflection point, that we are where we're shaping a better tomorrow. Our grandfathers and the grandmothers, they didn't have the knowledge or technology and or understanding of how they created the system the society we have today, but we do. we have quite a good understanding of what technology we can choose and the implications and the challenges with it. But if we do things right now, we will be a more prosperous, more healthy, and more sustainable world for our grandchildren. And that's just, for me, something that I wake up in the morning and get very excited with.
Mm. I think that's very nice. It made me remember, actually, a conversation I had with my grandmother when I was a kid. And she said, you know, when I was younger, we used to feel sorry for our parents because they used to ride on camels I'm from Middle East myself originally, to go places. And now we're going to probably look back, you know, our generation, our kids will look back at us and say, poor mom and dad, they used to drive in buses that people actually drove. There was actually a driver, and who knows what the future will look like. But for sure, it will be cool. And I like that, the way you stated that. I think it's a great way to see it. It's not only about the transition, and yeah, it's also about a better tomorrow, sure.
I must just say that having the experience to develop and like introducing a new concept of something that people hasn't seen before, that is the autonomous vehicles with the new design and everything included, I love showing it to kids. Mm. That's absolutely my favorites because they get it. Mm. They just like intuitively say, it's like, this is amazing. Mm. And like, they listen like as 5-6-year-olds like, oh, there's no driver in that one.
Yeah.
And intuitively understands that.
And that's fine.
Yeah,
right,
and they even think it's a little bit weird. Why should you drive it?
Yeah, yeah.
So technology changes,
they
and
don't
a lot
see
of
risk the same way.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And they feel it's just a natural next step.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought it was like, there was also when the first time I was in a self-driving car, and the driver pressed the button and the car drove off and was completely self-driving. Yeah. I was like, I don't care, I'm driving.
Yeah.
You trusted the technology.
Yeah.
And that's how I see a lot of the potential going forward. Mm. Yes, we will solve the climate crisis, but we're also going to build a better society with it.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So we're going to conclude with the last question to you, TJ. I mean, we've talked about transportation now and of course, financing it, etc. But it's also a lot related to energy, as you touched on before as well, right? And it's a big topic. So how can decarbonization help drive transformation in other industries, like the energy sector, for example?
Sure. I mean, I like kind of connecting it to what we were just talking about, because there's the sort of the ambition and the dream, of this kind of new future, and at the same time, there are very practical benefits to this as well, right? So in the case of power, right, we're always thinking about matching supply and demand at all points in time. But this gives us an additional degree of stability to the grid, right? To be able to actually, charge at times when maybe the load is lower, right? But supply is higher, right? It gives additional benefits for the overall grid, and it's tied into this whole ecosystem approach that we've been talking about. So in that sense, it does benefit the entire energy system. And that's something that we shouldn't forget. And
I think it's so cool talking about that ecosystem, because you need the energy capacity to help fuel the transport industry, but you also need the transport industry to elaborate on, right? It really all goes hand in hand. So thank you very much for a very nice conversation, and I think it's a beautiful way to put it like that. Like you said, Robert, the future is cool. We're going from threat to opportunity, but also to something really greater tomorrow. So thank you, everyone. And
thank you.
We're going to have a video in the end from our Minister of Infrastructure. So if you want to stay, just have a look at that. He couldn't make it and be here in person, but we've recorded it instead.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and dear friends. As we all know, major transformations must be made in the transport sector if we are to fulfill our commitments under the Paris Agreement and Sustainable Development Goals. It also creates a lot of opportunities for business, and therefore we need to combine the work with the green transition with competitiveness. And to do this, we need close cooperations between governments, industries, financial institutions, academia, and civil society. COP is an excellent platform to form these kinds of partnerships, and it's encouraging to see that this event has gathered such a wide range of expertise. and not at least Einride, which is a company that we are very proud of in Sweden, and I have had the fortune to actually see the test drive facility myself. Deploying zero-emission vehicles and infrastructure is a central matter for the Swedish government. It was also a priority during the Swedish presidency of the Council of the EU recently. And now, with the adoption of AFIR earlier this year, we have a framework for realizing recharging and refueling infrastructure for both passenger cars and trucks across the whole EU. This will provide the fundamental conditions for transport operators to reduce emissions in line with our climate targets and facilitate for European citizens to switch to zero-emission vehicles. Sweden believes that electrification of transport is one of the most important factors in the green transition. Electrifying heavy-duty vehicles is no exception. We promote the market introduction of electric heavy-duty vehicles and a nationwide network of public fast charging stations for heavy vehicles is now emerging. Ladies and gentlemen, our economies are to a large extent connected by road transports. We need to facilitate cross-border transport with common infrastructure. Entrepreneurship, innovation and sustainability must go hand in hand if we are to make this a reality. The transition is a collective responsibility that it requires widespread cooperation on the national and international level. Governments, industries, financial institutions, academia and civil society must join forces to make net zero a reality. Together, we can pioneer the possible, and I invite all of you to join Sweden in making CO2 emissions from road transports a thing of the past. Thank you for your attention.